Hi, everyone. My name is Jude Chehab. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I'm so excited to be speaking to Landon Van Soest today about his incredible film, Light, Darkness, Light, which is about a blind priest who becomes one of the first recipients of a bionic eye. Just to be honest, it's one of my favorite documentaries of the year, if not my favorite. I think I told Landon this, but my first time watching it, I started crying 9 minutes in. And I think so much of that is just the way that we enter as viewers and the way that we enter Father Ian's world and experience with him to a certain extent, but also obviously a superficial extent because we never truly fully know his experience. But there's something so intimate and caring in each frame, and really props to you, Landon, for creating that world and letting us enter in it. And it's just something that's so precious and very sacred, I think. I think that's what I felt mostly. Yeah, so excited to start. I have a
I
lot of
just say
questions.
thank you so much. I mean, I'm a huge fan of yours, and it's very high praise. But I just really appreciate you being, such a ardent supporter of the film. It means a lot to me.
Number one fan. Okay, yeah, I think just coming off of that and thinking about like the care and how sacred this film feels, which I don't think you feel a lot in documentaries that you watch nowadays. It feels very spiritual to me, and I love spiritual cinema. And obviously you can't detach faith from the film. It's the faith that the priest has, but also the faith that he has in the bionic eye. And so I guess my first question is just, is cinema a spiritual practice for you? Do you see cinema as something spiritual?
I think that I do, but it's funny. I don't think that I would have ever put it in those terms. I think, I coming into this film, I was much more fascinated by the science, and I think just as basically, we work in a visual medium and kind of the idea of sight and the opportunity to kind of reimagine that as something new was very intoxicating just from, kind of a visual art perspective. Um, and meeting Ian, so I kind of first connected with the surgeon and then sort of found out that he was going to be one of these participants. So the fact that he was a priest was really a complete accident and something that I think I had to kind of grapple with. So I think it was very imbued in who he is, and something that I knew would play a role in the film, but I think it took a long time to figure out how exactly that would sort of be reflected. But I think it did inform everything that we did in telling his story.
Mm. How do you then I mean, because the science aspect and human nature obviously are kind of revealing themselves at the same time in the film. And I think this is something that I've also struggled with is just like, how were you balancing um, the emotion with the information aspect of the film?
The goal is always to be 100% emotion. I mean, I
Yeah.
think that obviously there's kind of a topic, but it seems like such a distant background to me once we're actually trying to craft a film. I think I'm ultimately always very interested in human stories, and that's really the driving force of everything that I've done. And I think, topics that I've kind of made films about are all over the map and very different from each other, I would say. I mean, I'm certainly a big fan of, I guess, kind of what I'd term as pop science, I guess, neurology, the kind of Oliver Sacks's of the world. And I get very into that. But I think what draws me to it is really the impact that it has on human lives, the way that we each kind of experience the world differently. And for better or worse, I kind of keep falling back into what are really just kind of pretty humanistic portraits, despite my best efforts to do otherwise. But I think that I think once we were kind of on this journey with Ian, I had a very kind of short list of people to cast from, people that I kind of knew were going to be going through with this procedure. But he just stood out so clearly to me, and I thought was such a fascinating person. Um, Largely for the fact that he seemed like about the least likely person in the world to go through something like this. I mean, it's a very kind of cutting edge experimental medical procedure that was very physical, very mental, very emotional in a lot of ways. When we started filming, he was in his late 70s, and as a priest, I mean, somebody that just kind of seems right opposed or, on the opposite end of the spectrum from a real kind of science and technology world. So I was just fascinated by that, and immediately kind of drawn to like, why is this man, so eager to do this
We're
at this point in his life, and just kind of given his background and how he spends his time. So I think, I would say I'm a spiritually agnostic person in the truest sense of the word, but
yeah.
I think trying to access, some of Ian's drive, and really just, I think the idea of faith and the idea of hope just became so central to every element of his character, and everything that was really driving the story.
That's really interesting because you don't feel that in the film. Like the way that you're talking about how, like, I don't know, the separation of, let's say, religion and science, or like specifically why you were interested in him. They feel so intertwined. And maybe it's just because I come from, yeah, like a faith background. And so I see, maybe I'm projecting so much of myself in that, but it doesn't, I think that was what felt so special to me, was it wasn't like these two worlds that are now colliding. Like it just felt like it was so part of his faith in that way. How receptive was he to making like, how did that come about, to making the film and being part of it? His wife seems like a bit on edge the whole time. I don't know. Or she just like that. I don't know.
I would say he was a lot more on board with the film than she was. It was, I think it's so, I tend to say that making these kind of long form character portrait type documentaries is about 98% diplomacy and 2% artistry, and just trying to keep that access and keep people interested.
Yeah.
I think, I've had this experience a lot. I think the interest and the excitement was very high at the beginning, and it waned pretty quickly, as we kind of got into it, and very just aware how taxing and invasive it can be on people after long periods of time. But I'm just so indebted to Ian and to everyone who kind of opens their lives in that way, and then kind of make themselves vulnerable and available. I think going in, he probably had a very different idea of what I was trying to do. I think that he, really had a mentality
Which
from the
was
outset that
okay.
I think he was probably imagining something much more kind of classic BBC kind of. He wanted to be very proper and very astute in kind of his observations and his information. I think that he saw participating in this trial largely as a way to help advance the science. And it's going back to something that you said before. I mean, I think the kind of like science and technology is sort of this classic opposition, but
Yeah.
I went into it a little bit with that mentality. I don't think that was true of Ian, and I don't think that's true in the film. I don't think he saw that kind of separation. I think that he articulated that very well to me, and very well in the film, about sort of human limitations, that I think is probably the line in the film that I think sums him up the best, that kind of lands. I'm going to misquote it, but basically that humans are never going to solve all of our problems. We're never going to have universal understanding, but that our time here on Earth is about trying to push the limits of that. Try to expand what's possible, and do what we can for our fellow human beings. So I think he had a very altruistic outlook kind of from the beginning, and I think participating in the film was probably an extension of that for him. If I can psychoanalyze, but I think that it was it's a very challenging experience for him in so many ways, and I hope that he found some solace in kind of being a sounding board. And I think once we kind of got over a little bit of that veneer of wanting to kind of give the official party line, and feeling like he was there to kind of promote this experience, that he really did open up quite a lot about the experience that he was actually having, and the good and the bad, but amazingly always stayed very optimistic despite what seemed to me some pretty extreme challenges.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, I want to go back to something that you were just talking about. Maybe this is just like selfishly wanting to know, but like, how do you maintain that interest? Like looking towards my next film. Yeah, seems so tough. In
It
such
is a
sense,
huge challenge.
yeah.
100%. Yeah, no, I think it's the most challenging thing, and it's probably specific to the way that I've chosen to work, and kind of doing these very long form kind of character stories. But there's not an easy answer. I mean, I think that you know, a lot of it is constantly restating the goals. I think it's trying to find a shared goal, trying to find a shared vision. I think a huge part of it is, in my mind, trying to make, the subject of the film feel and be a collaborator, that they feel like they have a very active role in that process. And I think, the film benefits for it. We benefit for it. Everybody benefits by that if you can achieve that. I think it's not always easy. I think, just using this film as a case, I think his goals for doing it were very different from mine at the beginning. And I think we had to kind of find that overlap and find that way to move forward over time. But I think that he played, obviously we're trying to imagine something in the film that so few people on earth have ever experienced, that I will never experience in my lifetime. So I was so dependent on his articulation of that, even in the way that we were creating visuals and the way that we were letting the story unfold. So really a lot of that, I mean, not much of that conversation, those types of descriptions are really in the film. I just think so much of that time and energy is kind of the homework of making the film. And again, trying to talk through those goals and frustrations and trying to, create enough space to where people can tell you if they're not happy about the way something is going, or have questions about, how much longer is this going to take?
Yeah. How long did it take?
It's been a really long project. We actually, I mean, it's been in kind of fits and bursts for a variety of reasons, but we actually started filming it in 2014. So it's been a decade since we started. But it's been kind of, I don't know. I mean, we kind of went and shot, without any funding, just because we knew, the implant was happening, and it was kind of like very narrow window. So we shot quite a bit in 2014, and then didn't really raise any money until maybe 2018. So we kind of went back and shot a lot more, and had the funding to do all the kind of recreations and the animation, and all of the things that I think really filled in the gaps. And then, and then COVID hit. I just went bankrupt. A couple bumps in the road, but
you're here now. I think you were just talking about the visuals. Obviously, I mean, they're so stunning, and you really created a world to mimic this reality, the memories, the current day vision that he has. How did you make that language? What did that look like?
I mean, that was really so much of the fun for me. I think that in my previous films, I've kind of made the decision, and I have questions for you about this, because I think that your work, I'm very envious of it in that you really kind of break that fourth wall, and that you're a very direct participant in your films. I think that or at least in Q, I've kind of made this decision to really create, a cinematic world where there is that sort of suspension of disbelief. And I think in my previous, and so in Joaquin, we're following, one girl over the course of several years. But really at every turn, all of our collaborators were, this should feel like a narrative. We don't want to, we don't want to break that fourth wall. We want people to feel fully immersed in this as if it was a narrative film. And I think I've kind of had that aspiration in a lot of ways. I felt like Light, Darkness, Light was an effort to see how far I could push that, to really kind of widen the scope of just different cinematic tools and a lot of different things to play with. In part because I think I realized very early in the film, and I think this is just so challenging in a documentary, that really the whole story was happening in his head, that it was a very internal conflict, that he was sort of trying to grapple with, his memories of what normal vision was like, and sort of, parsing that with this kind of artificial vision that he's getting now, that putting those things in opposition to each other was going to need somewhat of a heavy hand, in trying to build that world, as you said, and to try to kind of create that language. So it was, it was in a way maybe more of a classic, approach to shooting some of those memory sequences. And I think, we had a lot of fun with that. We did a lot of experimentation, kind of shooting through prisms and sort of trying to visualize the experience of losing sight in a wide variety of ways. And shot tons and tons and tons of material, and there's a few seconds of it in the film. But that was kind of my, again, that was just sort of the fun of kind of using a cinematic language and trying to pull it into the story. I had a really amazing collaborator in Paul Trillo, who's a very accomplished director in his own right, but really a visual artist who's been very kind of on the cutting edge of technology for a long time. Done a lot of really amazing work with AI recently, but going back to when we started this film, there was kind of a movement in sort of the tech world where people were hacking Xbox Kinect controllers and actually using them as depth sensor cameras. So people were mapping, shouldn't pretend to understand exactly how this works because it's all over my head. but basically using depth sensor cameras as data for animation. And some of the early versions of this that I saw, I just thought were so cool and so kind of alien and kind of glitchy in their representation that sort of immediately clicked with me that this could be a representation of how, he's seeing with, a camera that works in some ways similarly, that it's kind of using, whereas a depth sensor camera is kind of shooting a infrared beam or whatever and measuring the time it takes to get back, basically the technology that Ian has in his eye is just using electrodes to kind of shock his retina. So there's kind of these data points that are, somehow trying to get mapped into a cohesive image. So I saw that and was really drawn to a few examples of that I just thought were very cool aesthetically. Paul really, was able to do a lot of the work to figure out how to actually do that. But we shot a lot of depth sensor camera footage, and a lot of the animation is kind of derived from that in the film. So I think a lot of those were, we were sort of trying to mimic some of the technology that was at use in the device and the way that we were creating visuals for the film too. So
Yeah.
A lot of just creative opportunities and challenges there that I think were just a lot of the fun of the production for sure.
Yeah. And even like with the memories, I mean, you're saying you shot a lot and then you end up using whatever. This happens all the time. Obviously not what you expected, but kind of was the placement of it what you had envisioned with the memories?
I think it was. I mean, the very first time I ever interviewed Ian, I kind of asked him what some of his earliest memories were. And he kind of immediately talked about playing in a wheat field and kind of having this, kind of bucolic life in southern England where he grew up. And it just kind of immediately started, getting those kind of Terrence Malick triggers and that real kind of nostalgic, warm light. I think in production, we shot two kind of huge batches of recreation. So there are the kind of, southern England wheat fields type shots. That we spent a week shooting. It literally makes up a few minutes of the film, but we also went to Nova Scotia, and I just really loved the idea of really kind of trying to find the fog. And he was in a coastal Canadian town when he found out that he had this disease and that he was going to lose his sight. So I just love that idea of trying to play off the fog and the kind of lighthouses and that idea of kind of, feeling something fade away and just getting that kind of gray out in the distance. So, we spent a lot of careful planning, trying to time of year to be in the foggiest place on earth on the foggiest days of the year. Again, I think there's one shot.
The struggles.
I think that was certainly the way I was thinking of it, that we had this very kind of warm, nostalgic idea from his childhood of what sight was at its best, and that we had these kind of much sort of colder, grayer, image that of losing his sight, and then really trying to create something that felt organic, but very kind of computer generated in the way that we were creating the animation. So those were kind of the buckets that I was working from in that sense. I would say that we ended up using probably a lot more of the, the kind of midlife losing sight recreations in ways that I didn't anticipate at all. I think that became a much bigger part of the film and not in such a cold kind of way. But and that's really to credit to our amazing editor. I think she really kind of found a way who's Lily Francis Henderson, another BFC member, Paul's old school BFC as well. I know we'll talk about that a little bit, but I think she really just found a language for those, the kind of memory sequences that really I think did achieve what I was hoping to do. I really didn't want them to feel like recreations. I think that was always the idea, that we wanted them to feel a little disjunct and much more impressionistic and kind of feel a lot more like memories than anything that was trying to recreate certain events,
Yeah. Yeah, I love hearing about like how everything's kind of, where it gets shaped up, right? Because you might have a certain intention with something and then it's just like completely flipped. I think something that's really obvious is like you created take us into his reality, but it feels like this thought out bubble. And it feels like every image is so precise and intentional. So how much are you shaping during production? And do you have bullet points? Like, tell us I need this shot of him doing X, Y, or I need something that hits this emotional beat.
I think in this case, I mean, it is something that I think about a lot. I mean, I think that what I've learned kind of the hard way in previous films is that giving structure and shape to a documentary, especially kind of a verité style documentary, is about the hardest thing in the world when you're not anticipating that. I think, pretty much every film that I've made, I've definitely had beats in mind of like, what's the inflection point? I mean, just kind of like screenwriting 101. Like, I think the best tool for making a documentary are like screenwriting classes. And really like understanding just very basic mechanics of story beats, like I'm a huge fan of the guy that wrote Save the Cat, right? And they like break down some of like those beats, because I think when you're telling, especially a documentary, when you're just dealing with years of reality, it's so hard to create that shape in a way that has kind of narrative turning points, that has a satisfying ending, all of those types of things. So going into this, I mean, again, I've worked on several verite films where you just have thousands and thousands of hours and you're trying to craft that. I was attempting to be much more intentional about that in production on Light, Darkness, Light, about anticipating where those changes were and what some of those beats were going to be. So probably a little over-engineered in that sense of the story. I think the fact that, again, like in Foreign Key, we're dealing with a teenage girl who's very active, has a lot going on in her life. It was kind of like every day there seemed like there was some kind of new drama or some curveball or whatever, that I was now dealing with, an older guy. He's pushing 80. His life is pretty much, he gets up, he goes to church, he comes home. Like there's not a lot going on. So there was a good degree of, really needing to kind of plot that out, figure out where those beats were going to be. And I think that I really, I am definitely of the mind that, while we're dealing with nonfiction, while we're dealing with real events, that there's a very high degree of subjectivity in every piece of journalism, or certainly documentary. I think that my loyalty is always kind of to the story, and to the cinematic experience. So I think that there, that I own that. I mean, I'm sure it's obvious, especially in this film, that, again, we're using interpretations and animation, we're using flashbacks, we're using memories, we're using all of those things, that it's, in my mind, really kind of showing the hand of like, this is a very highly engineered story. That, I mean, I think there were, there's a broad spectrum there. So I'm not saying that anything in the film is at all made up. I mean,
Or
everything
no, of
is
course
presented
not.
as it happened. um, but it's kind of like, I knew that he was taking this trip back to England for the first time since he had the device, for example. You know, as I said, the very first time I spoke to him, I asked him about his first memories and to kind of describe, his childhood or whatever. And he just had such strong kind of touch points. So, there's a fair amount of connecting the dots there. And I think kind of, that kind of built in some structure that kind of gave us some yard mark for something that he was working towards and that we could kind of measure success or failure against. So, um, obviously the way that we were planning the recreations and all of that are just kind of built off that snippet of what was kind of revealed in the interview.
Mm. Yeah, I don't think it's like a matter of the audience ever doubting you or, questioning whether or not this is nonfiction. I think it's just like very clear that there's a strong director. Like the storyteller is just so, like your hand is so obviously there in every frame, wherever we're cutting, just the intentionality I think is so present in the film. And yeah, I think going back to like story, I know like at least with Q, I didn't expect the ending at all. This has a very bittersweet ending. I don't know if I'm like any spoilers, but is this kind of, was it what you envisioned? Was it what you also, I like something I see in documentaries, what's difficult is when we're also submitting to grants and stuff, it's like you have to write out what you envision as this ending. How much did that shift and change for you?
Trying to think back on what I expected. I mean, obviously, he's getting this implant. We know it's a very experimental procedure. A lot of what was kind of out there in the world was really pitching this thing as this kind of miracle cure, and it was just like, even New York Times articles were talking about this implant like it was, in biblical terms, ironically, that it was this kind of, giving sight to the blind, straight out of it,
Yeah.
but talking about it in these very grandiose terms, I think there was a little bit of an air of like, it sounds too good to be true. And I think in my mind at the time too, I mean, it's just kind of like, probably a crazy thing to say, but it's almost like, we look to science and technology in the way that a lot of people look to, the second coming, that we think we can kind of engineer our way out of all of our
Yeah.
problems.
Yeah.
And I think that, I definitely kind of recognize that, but I think that I also kind of, drank the Kool-Aid, so to speak, too, that I was like, wow, this is amazing. It's incredible what that would be like. And was really hoping or thinking at some point that this is going to be a really positive, life-changing experience, and looking for ways that it changed his life. And I think the reality of that is that it didn't change his life very much, that it was ultimately a very disappointing experience for him. And that was, I mean, that's a huge challenge as a filmmaker, right? That it's just kind of like, I talked about that a lot in our edit and in post. I mean, that immediately was far more interesting to me, because again, I think I recognized, on this process and again, really trying to tell a character story far more than, reveal something about technology or even like, delve too deep into much of that. That this man is, put all of his hope and faith into this device that doesn't meet his expectations. And I think that created such a more nuanced, interesting opportunity to really explore how anybody grapples with disappointment. I mean, it becomes a very universal idea to me. And I think that he is very heroic in his handling of that in the film, and it gives me a lot of respect for him. And obviously, I'm sure as artists or human beings, we're projecting so much of our own experience or, overlaying ways in which we can kind of relate to those types of experiences in a very different sense, that that I think it kind of became about that for me in a huge way. How do we deal with these kind of crushing disappointments? I mean, not only obviously like it's kind of part of this trial. I mean, losing your sight, I mean, it's just like I can't imagine anything more devastating. And I think that it's, you kind of start putting yourself in those situations. That's just like, I just don't know. I've spent 40 years blind. Like, would I continue to try? Would I continue to hope? Would I continue to say, like, there's some wild off chance this could make it a little better? Would I be on board for that? Having something surgically implanted in my eye and going through, months and months of rigorous training. So I forget what the question was. But I think that was just like those ideas became so much more present. And I think going in thinking that a lot of the thematics were going to be about technology and about the promise of technology, that it just in such a huge way became a question of like, how do you deal with disappointment, and so just sort of crushing disappointment became so much more palpable to me. But I think like that's just such a harder thing to telegraph. I mean, if it had been this kind of mind-blowing, this is a real tangent, but going back, so I had heard about this device, like, I don't know where, maybe a magazine article or something, like forever ago, and it always just kind of stayed with me. And again, just sort of a lot of fun for me to imagine what it would be like to see again and kind of see anew. And during some, was it Irene that hit the city? I forget. There was some hurricane that hit New York, and I was like trapped in my apartment. I don't know. I think keep my name straight. Anyway, but like everybody was trapped in their apartment. It was almost like a pre-COVID thing for like 24 hours. But for whatever reason, I sat down and wrote a short script that was sort of the premise of Light, Darkness, Light. I'm really not a narrative filmmaker. I haven't done a lot of screenwriting, but I wrote a short film about a man who had been blind for a long period of time, got some miraculous surgery, and was able to see again. But the outcome of that, I mean, the premise was that he kind of realized that he created a whole fiction in his head of what he thought, the reality was. And once he could see again, everything was totally different than he had imagined it to be. Very different than the track that Light, Darkness, Light took. So I think that was obviously kind of in my mind, and just thinking about like, what is going to be surprising, what's going to be new, what's going to be different, when you've spent 40 years without any sight. But again, I think that was just such a left turn, and something that was just so different, and sort of being able to kind of pivot in that way, making documentaries is a unique challenge, I think.
Yeah. But it's so interesting because like it's not that it's not far from that, or maybe this is how I read it, but like, obviously it has the framework of like a tragedy a bit by the end, there's pain, but we definitely leave with some sort of beauty, and you question everything because ultimately as the viewer, when we're watching, we're also hoping for this perfect ending, whatever we assume is perfect. I think that's part what it is as well, is like, if he did get his sight back, would that have solved everything? Would it have been what he wanted? And I think it allows you to ask all those questions. And also kind of ultimately by the end of the film, the idea of perception and kind of, how he perceives his wife and what that could look like and what could be beautiful. And that really opens up for me as a viewer. And I think that's what kind of you hold on to by the end, where it's like, we can create, I don't know, vision in a way. I don't know, but it's not to like romanticize it, but like that is like what I really, I think, left with. Yeah. I don't know.
Great. I mean, I think that's largely what I left with too. And I so much of that credit is to Ian, the human being, the person, and not Ian, the character, which I will make a distinction between, but I just kind of alluded to his optimism and to his outlook, and I think that, I don't know, again, if this is the filmmaker in me, like every creative project I've ever done, where it's just kind of like, this is going to be this, just amazing, flawless, like epic of a perfect thing that I'm going to create. And there's always some degree of like, just not really what I dreamt of, and I think that's just true of any kind of creation or something. And I think that was very kind of true of this experience for Ian, that he absolutely did not get what he wanted or expected, but I think that he truly did see the value in that. And just being able to say, this is a step in the right direction, that we're going to move mountains, pebble by pebble, was so like, just hit me, because I think had I been in his shoes, I just imagine I would have, and a lot of people were, frankly, like some of the other people that were involved in this trial ended up publicly coming out and just saying like, they duped me, or like this thing went wrong and it's not what I wanted. And, a lot of different things happened along the way. I don't get into all the nuances of that, but there were people that were very, very heartbroken.
Wow.
And that was not Ian, I mean, he maintained a really healthy perspective. And I think just really kind of had this idea that it's better than it was, and that's something to be glad about.
Got a priest, man.
It's a bigger person than I.
Yeah. It goes back to, that's so interesting. That's so interesting. And just talking about him now, I mean, this is your second screening? Would it be your second?
Yeah, I mean, it's screened in the UK, and then this is the first.
Yeah, the premiere. Okay, this is the first. Yeah. Is he coming to the screening? How? Okay, yeah. What's the?
He's not. It's a little bit of a sad story. I mean, he's now. So he was. I don't know. He's now in his mid-80s, and unfortunately, I think just isn't in great health.
Yeah.
COVID was really kind of hard on the whole family. I mean, hard on everybody, but he lives in Toronto, and I think, the way that they enrolled the vaccines and everything there were kind of different. So, unfortunately, I don't think he's kind of in great health and well enough to travel. But
how does his family feel about the film?
It's a good question. I haven't been able to go there and really watch it with them. I mean, they've seen it. They have links. I think they're. What was Jean's line? Oh, she could quote it directly. I mean, she's a very proper kind of British.
I was gonna say,
veneer, sort of like, well, it's very artistic.
Yeah,
something about it.
Well made.
Yeah. I think it was kind of, they've moved on so far from this, honestly, that it kind of seems like ancient history to them. So, but yeah, I mean, I think that they've really kind of been amazing throughout this whole process. I know his daughter in particular has just been a huge advocate for the film. So
yeah, the family seemed really sweet in those scenes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, maybe moving a bit more like to the technical stuff of finances. How you spent like 10 years, how difficult was it to fundraise for a film like this?
It's always hard. I don't I think we were, like I said, I mean, I just had to leave it and come back to it over and over again. I was just very fortunate to have some really amazing collaborators and some people that were kind of willing to pick up and go and kind of work for free and really kind of invest time and energy and donate here and everything else. But yeah, I mean, I just kind of fell in love with the idea going way back, and connected with a surgeon in Toronto who I kind of found out was just getting ready to launch a trial there. And he was very eager. He had a son who was a filmmaker who, ended up being really influential and helping a lot with the film in Toronto. So we were able pretty early on to get just a few kind of angel investor types. I mean, we did kind of a crowdfunding. I don't know if a lot of people do this. I mean, it seems like crowdfunding in general kind of bubble burst a little bit. People got a little saturated probably.
Okay.
Getting 10 or 15 Kickstarters. And I was very cognizant of that even at that time, that I was just kind of like, I'm just so tired of getting these. I don't want to be that kind of spammer. But what we were kind of able to do somewhat successfully was use a crowdfunding campaign just to make it like overt, like we're looking for money, we're looking for this amount of money, we need X, Y, and Z. but really target that towards people that had the ability to give large sums. So I was actually able to, you know, through channels, I mean, get that in front of some of the board members of some nonprofits that I had worked for, and people that I knew were, you know, open to giving money to the arts, basically, and able to get, you know, raise some money that way, you know, in the few thousands of dollars, I'll say. So, um, and ultimately did get, you know, some kind of larger, you know, chunks of grants and things like that. So that was kind of enough to keep us going. And I think we did a lot of that shooting, you know, without paying ourselves for that first year or so. We're able to get the kind of fundraising trailer and stuff like that, you know, very small amounts of money. I actually pitched it at Points North, and like miraculously connected with a company called Riot at that time, or YOT, who was giving kind of grant slash investments, and they were really our primary funder. And then of course they went away, and we got rolled into Vice, and then Vice went through bankruptcy.
This film has had a long life of companies closing.
Yeah. We've survived several bankruptcies and a global pandemic. But yeah, I don't know, you know, it's just kind of been one, you know, I truly have had amazing collaborators. And I started working with the documentary group, who, you know, has a really interesting history. I think was founded by a guy who, you know, kind of came up through ABC News and was working with Peter Jennings, but then got behind some great documentaries, Cartel Land early on. And I was really enamored that they'd been involved in that. I love that movie. You know, they've just been hugely supportive. I think they probably have yet to see a dime from this, but did a lot of, you know, just a ton of support. Easily segue into talking a bit more about BFC that way.
Yeah.
You know, I put such a premium on really kind of having, you know, a creative community, and having people who are like-minded, and you know, are doing it for the love of doing it. You know, if you make documentaries or any films in any sense, you know, you're sort of deluding yourself if you think that you're gonna get rich, or probably even pay the bills on doing films like this. And if you are, you're making kind of massive compromises to a big streamer or some kind of huge conglomerate. So, you know, I think just having that community is essential in my mind, and really kind of the most joyful part of making films. But you know, I can just say, you know, I went to a very, you know, small liberal arts school, and with an even smaller kind of film program in it. But, you know, don't know how much I learned practically about filmmaking in college.
Yeah.
It's kind of probably unfair to say, but I think that it's I mean, not that I didn't have great professors and great opportunities, but I'm just very kind of learned through doing type person. And I think the most valuable class or experience that I had there was really just kind of a workshop class, or sort of structured that way. There were maybe only about 8 students in the class, and we all kind of had our, you know, semester long project, and all just got so deeply involved in each other's projects and doing a real wide variety of work. But the fact that we all knew each other so well, the fact that we were able to kind of see film projects from their infancy kind of to completion. And also I think the fact that you were kind of able to look at your peers and say like, well, I think this guy's super talented, but I'm not into what this person is doing, you know? So like, maybe I'm going to take the feedback a little bit more from this person than I would from that person. And all of that really kind of became the model for BFC. And what I was really looking for, I think, you know, I kind of graduated school and I moved to New York City and wanted to be making films, and had no idea how to go about that, and felt, you know, incredibly isolated in that experience. And I was, you know, getting intern jobs and, even long past the time that VHS tapes were obsolete. I was literally, my job was copying VHS tapes and like handing them off to different executives. Now I was like, this is about as far from filmmaking or advancing my goals as I could possibly be. But so really just with a few friends of mine from school, we put out kind of a call to see if anybody wanted to get together and, watch rough cuts of movies and kind of do that week after week. And, we started with about 20 people, and it's just like mind blowing to me that, we're how many, 15 years into this now. And I've been very uninvolved for a while, sadly, just geographically, but it's so, it's extremely heartwarming to me that enough people still see the value in that community, that it's, going stronger and better and, far more organized and legit than I could have ever imagined. But I think it's, I just see that as such a testament to, the importance of having a creative community and really having peers that see what you're doing, that share goals, and that you're able to kind of bounce off and collaborate in different ways. Find those people that you really admire. So that's been an amazing experience. And maybe the project that I'm most proud of, honestly, that this BFC has just kind of continued to to have a life.
Oh, sweet.
Whatever small role I played in that, I'm very proud of.
One of the founders, for anyone that doesn't know. No, I think especially now, just like with everything that's going on in the industry and like the distribution landscape and everything just being so tough, I think what I've realized the most is like I just want to work with people that I care about and friends, and like that. What's the point after that, And I think you had a couple people from BFC, right, working on this film. What I looked up when I did my little, was it one of the producers, editor, DP? Is that right?
Well, really, yeah, Paul Trillo, who I've referenced several times, did all of the animation and visuals, but, he's also a producer on the film. And really, it was he and I who kind of picked up and went to Toronto at the outset, along with, Ed David, our DP, who is the now husband of Frances Henderson, very Lily. So apologize. But, and she actually edited this after editing a previous film, and just being such a close collaborator, and really an amazing director, an incredible writer, an incredible editor. But I think that's, I've since kind of, I've gone away. I made films without Lily, and working with a different editor, that I was reminded just what an incredible challenge that is to collaborate with someone that you really just don't have that kind of history and that language with. It's just so incredibly valuable when you just know, and it's very rare, and again, I just count myself as so lucky to be able to work with people who are friends, and people whose, independent work that I just really admire, and that I kind of understand what their goals are, and what they enjoy doing. And if I'm able to put that to work, if I'm able to hitch my wagon to Paul and Lily's successes, I'm the better for it. So they're out there making me look good for sure.
And is that how you usually kind of grew up? Like, is it like because Paul was with you from the beginning in the project, and then like people just start like whatever feels right, or? Okay.
So I had my longtime business partner, Jeremy Levine, and I, also met in school, and we're kind of working together. And I think that was such, we just had such a shorthand and such a language. And I think in so many ways we kind of learned how to be filmmakers together, and I think that was, just such an incredibly valuable experience for me to work with him. And I think that, a lot of our film work was coming directly out of BFC, just coming directly out of that, Brooklyn filmmaking community at large. So I put a huge, important value on that. I should say in between when I started like Darkness, Light, and now I've made 2 other features. But one of them was was bought and bankrolled by Hulu very early on. And that was just such a vastly different experience that made me appreciate this community so much more. I mean, there were a lot more controls around, who the crew members were, who were in various positions, who was a trusted vendor, so to speak, that, it just made it far more challenging. And I think, and not that I wasn't working with, wildly talented people. I mean, I was very excited to work with those people and very envious of all that they'd accomplished. But I think that there was it just made me realize how much of my, collaborative experience is kind of an unspoken sensibility of people that I've gravitated toward, and people whose work I really admire, that I can put a lot of faith in them, just knowing what they're capable of and what they're after. But for me to step into a directing situation where I was, working with an editor and other crew members and people that I'd never met and didn't know was just such a heavy lift, and it was just so hard. And yeah, I think again, it just really, really made me value this experience so much more. And that importance of really just kind of having that community and sharing sensibilities.
Shout out BFC. Really. Yeah, it's so special. Okay, I don't have that many more. I guess one, kind of romantic question, but we talked about like perception and it's such a big theme in the film. I don't know, how has like your perception on the world changed after making the film? Very romantic. But
yeah. Well, it's I mean, it was an evolution for sure, and I remember actually talking with a grant writer very early on about how we, I think when I would kind of go out and pitch the film, I'd sort of find myself having these kind of spiraling conversations about vision, about perception, and just so many kind of fun things to think about, just almost these kind of like thought experiment, philosophical ideas, that, we're trying to distill this into a pitch. And it's like, how do you take these very broad, heady ideas and put those into a pitch? But I remember something a grant writer said to me that really stuck with me. And it's something that I came back to a lot during the production, was saying that, if you can make viewers walk out of a theater aware of the experience of sight, aware of the fact that they're seeing, that this film will be very successful. And I think that there's a sense of awareness that has really kind of shifted for me. I do think reading, a lot of the science is just so kind of bewildering and mind blowing to me, that things that I've learned in the process, that, your eyes are literally an extension of your brain, that they're the only part of your nervous system that is exposed to the outside world. But they're fundamentally just receptors, that all that they're really doing is capturing light. That the entire experience of vision, and, by extension, your entire experience of reality and conscious life is constructed in your brain. And that when you have memories and you have experiences, that the neurological processes are not really all that different. And that when you're sort of breaking that worldview, when there are things that come to challenge what you take as objective reality, that it's about the most complicated, mental process that you can go through. And I think that was sort of a guiding principle in the way that we structured the film, and a lot of what I was thinking about in making it. Just what a mental challenge that would be to, there's a lot of different devices kind of like this. There's a device that you actually put under your tongue, and people say that it somehow translates to experiences of vision, and kind of the way that they're able to use electrodes to stimulate tongue, and that I'm going to botch all the actual science behind that, but it's much easier to see in a case like that how experiencing sight in that way would be so different. But I think it's every bit as different for Ian and what he's experiencing. But, I think that translates to so many experiences that we have that, we were making this film, we started post, like, in my memory, I mean, like weeks before COVID really hadn't shut everything down.
Yeah.
But I think, I was thinking a lot about that it was just suddenly we're all living in a new reality. And I think there's so many events and things like that in your life that, you construct so much of what is normal. And I think a huge part of that is about constructing your own identity and the things you tell yourself about yourself. And when there's kind of fissures in that, when there's kind of exposure, things that challenge your own identity or things that challenge, what you kind of hold to be an objective truth, that coming around to that and sort of seeing that, your perception and your perspective, I think, are entwined in some way, and kind of being able to come around and redefine things along those lines is a massively challenging thing to do. So I've tried to be a lot more open to a sort of a constant process, I would say, but just being open to seeing things from all sides and kind of experiencing, life events in different ways. So maybe that's a very, very kind of broad takeaway or something that I've sort of personally tried to adopt.
Yeah. Because I think, I mean, at least for me, by the end of the film, you just feel so overwhelmingly human, and I think it makes you kind of question so much within yourself. That's why it's very spiritual for me. Okay, what's the plan with the film? Where can people see it? Next steps?
Call your senator. We're really at the beginning of our journey. I unfortunately don't have a way to answer that. So we are having our premiere at DocNYC in New York today. If you're not fortunate enough to be a ticket holder and be in New York tonight to see it, it will be on DocNYC's streaming platform for another month about. I don't have that exact date off the top of my head. But you can find it there. We're very hopeful that we'll be, continuing to tour to different film festivals. Call your local programmer and tell them you want to see it.
Got you.
And then we're going. I think we're looking forward to broadcasts in the U.S. and certainly in Europe, and then hopefully beyond. So all very much in process. Stay tuned. You can always kind of follow the film at the documentary group's website, or my company, Transient Pictures website. We'll keep updates on screening information and distribution there.
Wow, amazing. Thank you so much, Landon. I feel like I've learned so much. I want to be a mentee under you, and just the filmmaking process is so incredible, and I think it really shows in the work that you make.
Well, very, very high praise, and I look forward to trying tables and getting to interview you soon.
See what happens. All right. Bye, everyone. I don't know what is the end. Thanks, Landon. Someone fix that ending. I don't know what that was. Okay.
Really, thank you for doing this, Jude. I'm so glad we got to chat about this. And Tiana, if you're still listening, thank you so much for making this happen. I think this is such a cool idea. And really genuinely hope that, it's something that we can keep going and I can contribute to. I would love to be on the other side of the table. I'm much more comfortable there.
Sometimes I sort of wonder what it would be like to have some eyesight again. I've been told that it could actually be as frightening an experience as losing my sight in the first place.
Let's talk about the bionic eye. These 60 electrodes stimulate electronically the retinal cells.
Yeah!
Thank you.
if I got at least functional sight back, I'm becoming a bit emotional just thinking about it. I really am.
It definitely takes a brave person to be willing to undergo an Argus implant at this point, simply because it is so new. I've been practicing retinal surgery now for 25 years. I truly never thought I'd see anything like this.
It's not like normal sight.
That provides artificial images created by a computer to the brain. It's a departure from our philosophical upbringing.
It's cruel to create the kind of hope in somebody that all I have to do is find enough money to buy these glasses and then I can see. I think sometimes I've had the impression that Ian would give almost anything to be able to see again.
Do you think that's part of your identity?
Absolutely. I don't know who I would be if I could see again.
Life can be fairly complicated, and I've been given to understand that I'll be starting over again.